I have with me today Mika Almog, the content director of an organization or a coalition of organizations called It's Time. And I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV News, and welcome back to the ILTV News Podcast. And welcome to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, you worked with a group of 60 other organizations to hold what is called the People's Peace Summit. Mm-hmm. It's part of this coalition I mentioned called It's Time. What exactly is It's Time and what happened at the summit?
Absolutely. So It's Time is a truly unprecedented umbrella initiative that has brought together 60 peace and shared society organizations in Israel. From the biggest one, Standing Together, Women Wage Peace, Zazim, to all of the even smaller organizations, but those that are still yet very, very significant. And for the first time ever, these 60 organizations have come to work together, not only in cooperation around the different projects that we do, but also in sharing our budgets and really, really working together as one. So It's Time is not a new organization. What it is two things. One is a mechanism for getting these 60 organizations to work together. And the second is that the work of the 60 organizations working together creates a platform that is truly unprecedented in its breadth and its width. So we started, it's only been around for a year. We launched the initiative in July at the Menorah basketball stadium with 6,000 people, Arabs and Jews from all over the country who came together to call for an end to the war and for peace, to begin a different path for Israel. And then in December, we went on the People's Peace journey, which took us from Shfar'am all the way up north to Netiv Asara, all the way down south. We had 14 stops along the way in Jewish and Arab cities and villages, all with mixed audiences, and we had 14 completely different events, because part of the theory of change behind the It's Time Coalition is the idea that the peace movement or the peace camp is actually significantly bigger, wider, and more diverse than it appears to be, and not only in its representation or more often lack thereof in the media, but also even in its perception of itself. So bringing these 60 organizations together made it possible for us to reach out to 14 different stops all over Israel and create local content teams. Because the idea is that I think if you want to support peace, you're very limited in the way you can express it. But we reached out and we said, here's what we're doing, here's what we believe. If you want to join us, tell us how. How would you like to express your participation? And so some places had, speeches, and other places we had a bilingual children's play and a hip-hop show, and, really very different things from place to place. And then our greatest and most ambitious plan to date was the People's Peace Summit that took place on May 8th and 9th in Jerusalem. On the 8th, which was a Thursday, we had cultural events and tours all over the city. We had about 50 different places, including the Cinematheque and YMCA and Muslala and whatever, a very, very long list of places, again, all of whom came into partnership with us to bring the It's Time ideas out to their crowds. And then on Friday, we had an entire day at Binyanei Ha'uma, where we had a full summit day, starting with a very, very big festive plenary event where we had politicians speak. Among them, we had Israeli politicians from Yair Golan and Naama Lazimi and Gilad Kariv, and Alon Shuster came in and spoke, and we also had Ayman Udeh and Ahmed Tibi, and we also had a special message recorded especially for us by President Macron of France. We had a message from Abu Mazen, and we also had the leaders of our organizations who spoke out, and a lot of citizens. And then we had a full day of sessions dealing with security, with education, with political alternatives to war. And we were able to bring 7,000 people to Jerusalem for the summit.
7,000? I didn't realize how many.
Yes, we had about 2,000 people join the events on Thursday for all the cultural events, and we had 5,000 people come into Binyanei Ha'uma. And so what we discover, and this again is related to our theory of change, is that there are certain axioms that say, for example, the Israeli public opinion has gone to the right since October 7th. And the truth is that there isn't really much of a way of expressing yourself if you haven't gone there, okay? And I find that it's almost impossible to gauge a public opinion on an issue that's not in discussion. So if, the Israeli people have been hearing things like total victory nonstop, but they haven't been hearing negotiation, they haven't been hearing, let's try an alternative. And when you actually break that barrier, or even we had a lot of musicians participate, and everyone told me no one's going to come, no one's going to want to be part of a peace summit. And you turn to these musicians and no one's even asked them. So I think we're sort of operating on these automatic assumptions that are a result of 30 years of indoctrination.
Now, you and I spoke previously, and one of the things that you said is that there's no time that is more urgent to talk about peace than during the actual war, which of course is ongoing. As you know, there are soldiers still dying every day. There are still 58. Thank God one of them has come out recently, but 58 hostages in Gaza, and certainly there is still no peace between Hamas and Israel, if at all, between Palestinians. So now, can you explain what that means? When emotions are so raw and so fresh, how do you talk about these topics?
Well, first of all, the It's Time taglines are, it's time to end the war, it's time to bring everyone home, it's time to make peace. Those are our three taglines. I pray to the great God above, and we're doing everything within our power to get to the point where we will no longer need to say it's time to end the war and it's time to bring the hostages home, because the war will be over and the hostages will be home. It will still, our third tagline, it's time to make peace, will continue to be relevant for a very, very long time. And I think
aren't you praying for it's time to make peace to also be checked off?
Well, eventually, yes. But I can tell you that, peacemaking is not just a process, and it's not just, Lord, again, I pray and hope and do everything within my power to reach that day. But even, I was in Belfast recently, and it's 26 years since the Good Friday agreements. And they're still making peace every day, because peacemaking is a way of life and it's a way of being. And it's an ongoing state of mind. And I think in Israel, we have a state of mind of war. We have a survival state of mind. Even when you hear people talk about their, for example, their fear of releasing prisoners, because we for the sake of releasing hostages, because we will now release the living hostages and bring them back to their families, but then those released will end up killing. And this whole state of mind tells you that the possibility that we will eventually reach a point where our reality will not be constantly kill or be killed, it's not even an option. And it won't become an option if we don't make it an option. Okay, people say there's the expression in Hebrew, "Kshat naim yavshilu." Okay, when what's the help me translate this? When kshat naim yavshilu, when
the benefits are
when the circumstances ripen. Okay,
right.
And circumstances don't ripen. Okay, it's the same way of thinking of the status quo, as if you can take a certain situation in Israel and put it in the deep freezer and then remove it when you're ready. But and this is true for other, we tend to take for granted the fact that we've had for 4 decades of peace with Egypt, and we've had almost 3 decades of peace with Jordan. And those things didn't happen. They didn't ripen and fall off the tree one day. They came to be because people worked very, very hard to make it happen. And at the end of the day, a war ends in a peace agreement, in a peace treaty. This is how wars end. If you don't have peace, then that's a very good sign that the war is not yet over.
And Mika, it sounds amazing, on paper. None of us have actually seen these things come to fruition. And you mentioned the 7,000 people over the 2 days that came to Jerusalem, and it sounds like a huge number. Mm-hmm. But of course, we have 10 million people in this country. Yeah. So 7,000 out of 10 million is not as many as one would, like to see if the concept is not small or marginal. How do you push back at people? How do you respond to people that say this is just something small that, there's this group of idealistic people. But look, the reality is the country has gone to the right, or the country's not ready for peace.
No, I disagree, because I think that there's great difficulty in ascertaining how a public feels about something that's not in discussion. I'll say that again, because I think it's important to point out, because what we're dealing with now, and since October 7th, and the reason that October 7th came into be is the result of 30 years of indoctrination, 30 years of very, very, very
What's
effectively.
the 30 years come from?
The 30 years comes from the Rabin assassination. Okay, the
Rabin
assassination.
67.
No. The Rabin assassination in 1995. It was a national trauma like none other. Okay, in a very different way, by the way. That October 7th is a national trauma of none other. This, October 7th really sort of collapsed a lot of our conceptions and collapsed our concept of what the Hamas was capable of, and collapsed a lot of our conceptions about containing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and so on. I think the Rabin assassination in 1995 collapsed a different set of conceptions, and that was the very fact that the assassination happened tells you what conceptions were in place, because no one would have thought that a young Jewish man wearing a kippah was there to assassinate our prime minister. And into the heart of that trauma entered Netanyahu and started his 30-year reign. And in that 30-year reign, the very idea of peace had been removed from the table.
Just to clarify, Netanyahu has been the prime minister, I think, for 16 years, about something, almost all 16 of the last 18 years. Something like that.
Well, I mean, first
30 years is a stretch even for Netanyahu.
No, I accept that, and yet the bottom line, if you ask Israeli children to name a prime minister...
No, 100% Israeli children. But just to be clear, he hasn't been prime minister for 30 years.
It feels that way.
It feels that way, but he's not true.
Okay. And yet he is the longest lasting prime minister. He's gone, more than Ben Gurion at this point. And of course, he was also interested in term limits until he became prime minister, and then he lost interest in that. But I really don't want to talk about Netanyahu, because I think
just wanted to make sure our viewers weren't thinking, wait, you've had a prime minister for 30 years, so...
Right, but I mean, the processes that I'm talking about, even though there was Barak and Olmert, and I'm not forgetting that, and very briefly we had the Memshelet Shinui, and we were hoping that maybe that was going to bring about change, but the bottom line is that this has been the Netanyahu era.
Yeah,
for three decades. And I will tell you something, I will turn 50 in August. So I was 20 when thank you. I was 20 when Rabin was assassinated. And during my childhood, in my adolescence, in the background of my childhood and adolescence, there was a peace process. And you were for it, you were against it. It was the cause of many a fight in many living rooms. But the concept of Israel aspiring to peace was a constant. The question was how and when and with whom, but and it enabled us to see Israel not only through the prism of what it is, but also through the prism of what it aspires to be. Israel is a nation that aspires towards peace, and this is a Jewish commandment, right? Bakesh shalom verodfehu, okay? Ask for peace and chase after it, okay? Do everything you can. This is the essence of Judaism, and I think that's one of the most damaging things that have happened, is turning peace not only into something that is not, I'm not even talking about how, I'm talking about the very aspiration for peace being removed very systematically, very effectively, in a very poisonous way. And so, 30 years after the assassination of Rabin, we find ourselves in a government with Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and, people who were really on the periphery. And I don't think those people, extremists, they never disappear. Every society has its extremists. The question is, are they on the sidelines where they ought to be, and some of their ideas are outlawed and should be outlawed? Or are, the very man, Ben Gvir, who in 1995 held the emblem from Rabin's car and said, it's on video, you can YouTube it, and said, if we got to this, we'll get to Rabin, and indeed kept his promise. And he is now in the holy of holies, in the heart of our government. And so when we're talking about peace, I think it's almost impossible to say, well, does the Israeli public want want peace, or is it turning to the right without seeing the perspective of everything that came before? And I'll say one more thing, which is that, sadly, our opposition and many of the people who stand politically where I stand, we have a great deal of responsibility too. When you say that the Israeli public has gone to the right, okay, now let's assume that on your right there's a horrible swamp, okay, and it's poisonous and it will kill you. But on your left, there's a cliff. Okay. So you're going to go for the swamp and you're going to take your chances and, because that's what you have. And so part of our responsibility is to build something that people can actually turn to and can actually trust. And I think the year of It's Time, the It's Time Coalition being in existence has demonstrated that there's a huge thirst for it, that people are craving. And I think that it's time to examine a lot of the axioms and find out whether they're true. And I think when you scratch the surface, and this again is typical, and it's not an Israeli invention, which is that extremists are forever louder than moderates. They're forever more dominant than moderates. They're forever willing to give up, all of their time and their life in order to pursue, the one goal. Whereas moderates usually want to do things like just live our lives. We want to raise our kids and we want to have a job and we want to have a normal life. But this now, one of the things that we need to do is to dedicate a lot of energy and to sort of even make ourselves fanatics in that, in a sense, to make ourselves peace fanatics and make it very, very clear that also what we believe in is of our faith. Should be as respected and should be taken just as seriously as the faith and the belief of people on the other side. Okay.
I mean, Mika, there's not any red lines. I mean, October 7th, as you said, is a pivotal moment for Israeli society.
Yeah.
Like Rabin, in many senses, you said, to watch a Jew murder a Jew, we never thought we'd see that in our country.
Right.
And I think that with all of the challenges, operations, even wars that Israel has had over its existence of 77 years, nobody ever envisioned what took place on October 7th. When does the red line happen? The murder of our children, of our babies, the rape of our women. How do we still see these people as partners for peace?
First of all, nobody, and certainly not myself, sees the Nukhbot as partners for peace. Okay. I do not see the Hamas as partners for peace in any way, shape, or form. When I say that we should examine October 7th within context, that does not in any way, there's no inkling of empathy, there's no inkling of justification for the horrors done on October 7th, in no way whatsoever. I will say that this did not come out of anywhere, and nobody could predict that exact scenario, but I can tell you I was a columnist for many years, among other, for five years for Yediot Ahronot, and I wrote a column years ago saying, after there were, I think, 10 Palestinians who were shot for throwing rocks near the Gader, near the security fence, and someone wrote something about, okay, so, 10 Palestinians are dead, and I said, even if you don't care about 10 Palestinians being dead, even if you don't care about 100 Palestinians being dead, someday there will be 1 million Palestinians on that fence, because another part of this theory that has no grounding in reality is the idea that they'll eventually give up. And they won't give up. And so, and the Palestinians that we're talking about, and we had a lot of Palestinians in Jerusalem, we had a lot of Arabic on stage, we have many partners, both, Israeli Palestinians who are our fellow citizens, and we also had Palestinians from the West Bank and even Palestinians from Gaza. Dr. Iman, who sent us an amazing video. She's a doctor living in Gaza now, and she showed us what her life is like now. These are our partners, and these are true partners. And when Israelis look at Palestinians, they need to remember, that they are also hostages to their government in the same way that I feel we are hostages to a government that is corrupt, that is violent, that serves only its own survival interests, that has been taken over by extremists. They're in the same position that we are. And And, they pay a higher price for protesting. So, people will say, well, why aren't they out on the streets? Look at us struggling for our democracy.
Are under Hamas that will murder them for going against their own government, which is actually, again, kind of plays into that question about October 7th and the type of people that are, they're under a government that is untenable.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult for the people living there without question. Now, you've argued that peace is the only alternative to perpetual war. And I think that everybody would agree with that, right? It's either war or peace. So, there's not really anything in the middle. But, there are critics that say that we can't pursue peace now until this line that you said before of total victory. We need to get rid of this government, get rid of Hamas ruling in the Gaza Strip in order for us to be able to move forward with any kind of peace agreement. Why do you assume that these people are wrong? What makes you right?
I'll begin with the basic truth. Nothing in life is total.
Okay.
Okay? Let's start with that. If you're over 20 years old, you should know that. Total victory is a sham from the get-go because nothing is total, and certainly nothing in politics is total, and nothing in war is total. And the only way war ends is via discussion and via compromise. Okay, that's the only way wars end, and this is true everywhere. This is true in Northern Ireland and Belfast that I just mentioned, and this is true in Rwanda, and this is true in places that also thought, just like we do, that we have the most complex conflict that can never, ever be resolved. So total, the moment you put the word total, it's an illusion. And you're chasing something that you're never, ever going to get, okay? Believing in total victory is like believing that the Palestinian people will either disappear or give up their aspirations. So let's start with that. B, as I was saying about extremists within Israeli society, they're never going to be removed, okay? To be perfectly honest, I wish I could aspire to an Israel where there is no Smotrich and there is no Ben Gvir and there aren't any of the positions that they represent. But I don't aspire to that.
Extreme left and extreme right, both.
Well, first of all, I mean, let's not compare, okay? Because that's
I'm just
another
saying,
thing.
extremism goes on both sides.
Yes, but you know what? Nobody on the left has ever shot a prime minister. Okay, let's start with that. And nobody on the left has ever called for the destruction and the annihilation of anyone else, really. They never. Okay, so the whole comparison, and this is part of, I think, the problem with how the media approaches Peacemaker, is this idea of, extreme this, extreme that. No, it's not the same. There's no basis for comparison. And I'm not saying I have issues with the people who are on the so-called extreme left, but mostly because of their lack of flexibility, okay? And I think there are two organizations that haven't come under our umbrella because they, want to have it again, my way or the highway. I mean, this experiment with its time of bringing 60 organizations together, and these are all peace organizations, and we're all on the left, but they are not in the same place. And getting them to agree and to see that there is a greater target and the differences between us, we have to come together to achieve our greater goals so that we can have these disagreements. Otherwise, they will become a privilege that we don't have because we won't be able to live here.
So I want to ask you, you're at your event, you mentioned that you had this video by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas.
Yeah.
And, you're touting that as a very important video. There are those that believe still, that when we finish whatever we're trying to do in Gaza or hopefully end this war, that we will potentially, this is the Egypt plan, right, to put the Palestinian Authority in place in some capacity, get some help from the other Arab nations, maybe build some kind of peaceful relations. But there are also those who say, look, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is paying terrorists, right? There's the pay for slay. They're corrupt. And this isn't necessarily a figure that one would put up on a pedestal. And certainly when we know that they're paying terrorists who murdered, again, Israelis on October 7th. So how do you... how can there be peace with a leader like that? Is that what you're banking on?
No, it's not what we're banking on, and there's no doubt that Abu Mazen is also corrupt, problematic, too old, okay, to be in this position, and no longer democratically elected. I have no argument with any of that, okay? We did bring him in because, A, he truly delivered a message of peace, and I think it's significant, and I certainly think, the Palestinian Authority, as the authority itself, should be eventually the body governing the Palestinian people, not with the people there, and they also need to have elections, and, all of our leaders leadership, both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side, needs to go, and we need to have new leadership on both sides. And that, we can have a whole conversation about in and of itself.
Another
yes.
time, yeah.
And yet, one of the things that brought about or enabled October 7th was this concept that you should strengthen Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority in order to not enable the Palestinian Authority to eventually create a Palestinian homeland and aspire to a Palestinian state. And as we now know, the Netanyahu government with Qatar gave them the cash to come kill us. So, again, there's something I think very childish going back to the idea of total victory. So there's something very childish and very almost silly about trying to be about trying to create a dichotomy and saying, they're bad, we won't talk to them. They're bad, we won't talk to them. That's not how it works, Eventually, you make peace with your neighbors. And again, in Belfast, I sat at a community center with two men who had both gone to jail for murder. Okay, part of the Troubles in Ireland. They had both been on both sides. Okay, one was a Catholic, and the other one was a Protestant, and they had both gone to jail. These were both men with blood on their hands, and they're sitting here running a joint community center, and there are kids running all around them because it was Halloween or something, and they were talking about the distance that they had to make. But, eventually, if you rule out everyone, and again, which is not to say that I think that we should, incorporate nukhbot in our conversation. That's not what I'm talking about. But eventually, Israeli leaders in our early days were had come out of some of the Israeli
Haganah and other things.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course. So we're going to run out of time. We really have about 30 seconds left to finish. But you wrote this very beautiful piece about being a potential bereaved mother, and the reason. And this really is the bottom line, I think, of your argument. And I want you to share with people, and really in 30 seconds, why peace is so important right now.
Because I want my kids to live. My son today had this interview at the Tzanchanim, okay?
The paratroopers.
The paratroopers. And, I raised 3 kids who are very proud to be Israeli, who want to protect our lives here, who want to live here. And I am not delusional, and I don't think that everything is la-di-da and that we can drop our weapons and hand out flowers. But, I need to know that sending my son, our children, your children, everyone's children to war is the last choice. It's not the first one. I need to know that we have a government that has exhausted all options before sending our children to kill and be killed. And that's not the situation, and it has not been the situation for a long time. So above and beyond everything else, we live in a country where our kids go to the army at 18, all of them, and you take this child that you raised for 18 years and you entrust their lives to the decision makers. And I cannot accept a situation in which the decision makers are making their decisions not based on what's truly best for our children, but they're protecting their seat and they're trying to keep their coalition together. So the first thing above and beyond anything else is I want to keep my kids alive, and I want to know that decision making is based on what's best for the people.
Okay. So Mika Almog, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Maayan. I really appreciate this conversation.
Of course. Thanks.